Do not adjust your tracking. You are now listening to the VHSaturday podcast.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of VHSaturday, the show where we discuss the strange and unusual, odd and obscure VHS tapes that we obtain through thrift, gift, and grift. My name is Henry.
And I'm Allison.
And this week, we are joined by a special guest.
Hello, my name is John. I'm a longtime friend of Henry's. I absolutely love movies, and yeah.
Excellent. It's great to have you on the show, John. Thank you for joining us. I will give you the pleasure of introducing the film that we are discussing today.
So today we are discussing the Buttercream Gang.
The Buttercream Gang.
The Buttercream Gang is by Feature Films for Families, which we have discussed on this podcast in another episode. But this one is made specifically by Feature Films for Family.
That's right. So the last episode we talked about them was Frog, which I know you all listened to. Well, Frog was a made-for-TV movie that Feature Films for Families picked up. And a thing that they do is they will edit movies that already exist to reflect their quote-unquote traditional values. However, they also created their own original content, and the Buttercream Gang is pretty much their most popular original film. John, why don't you tell us what the Buttercream Gang is about?
So the Buttercream Gang, it takes place in Utah, I believe.
I assume it's Utah, but they don't say it.
That's where it's filmed.
Yes.
And the Buttercream Gang is a group of kids that have been around since the Civil War.
These kids have been around since the Civil War?
Yeah.
The gang has been around, and they have new members as time goes on. And what they did was they would help Civil War widows do things around the house or run errands for them. Or
Was it the Civil War? I just remember them saying the war.
The war.
And I assumed it was World War II. That's just me.
Yeah, what I read was the Civil War, so it's been happening for a long
Even
time.
longer. Holy shit.
The shopkeeper that they go into to buy supplies for their Buttercream official business constantly refers to his time in the Buttercream Gang.
Right.
And so they are just kind of like good Samaritans and help people around the neighborhood, and it's been going on for a long time. And so the movie opens with their president, Pete, moving to Chicago because his aunt thought he could be a good influence on the kids there. And he elects Scott to be the new president.
Scott was not wanting to be the president. And I said, well, if he's the president now, he doesn't want to be. Wouldn't you just make your first motion be to nominate somebody else? If that's how it just works, you can just nominate.
I elect Scott. Scott's like, why me? And then he's like, all right, see you later, guys.
and so if that's all it takes to make a new one, if I was Scott and I didn't want to be it, I'd be like, you, Eldon, you get to be president. I had to read that off the box. I didn't know the character's name.
Guys, we left out a really important detail. Pete moves to Chicago because his parents died.
Is that because his parents are dead? Like, that's what we're assuming. We assume it's because his parents are dead, because when he arrives to Chicago, his aunt is like, Pete, if both your parents are alive still, they would be really proud of you. And all of us lost it there.
I was like, there's really no better way they could have put out this exposition. Like, they had
It's like as he was walking up the stairs to like an apartment or something, she just kind of like stops him. Hey, if your parents are still alive, they'd be really proud of you. It's like
I'm still moving in.
Right? It's such an awful thing to say. Like, this kid's what, like 17 or something?
I'm assuming he's 17.
16 or 17, and the rest of the Buttercream Gang are just a little younger, maybe like 14.
Oh, it
15?
says 14 on the box.
Oh.
We should have read the box before we watched the movie.
We did a lot of research, you guys.
We read a lot about it, but we didn't read the box for some reason. We read a lot about it.
I was going to say, because he's still pretty obsessed with bikes and not cars yet. So this probably doesn't have his license.
Well, there was that, but also, like, Pete looks significantly older.
And he acts older, too. He kind of talks to them in a big brother kind of way, more than, whereas the rest of them kind of act more like equals.
I remember watching this, and at first, my reaction to him moving away was because he graduated high school. I said last day, I was like, oh, he's got to be 18 then. That's why he's moving away to Chicago. But then it turns out, no, some other reason. Either his parents are dead and now he's moving back, or he's just going to be a good influence. Like one of those is the reasoning. Maybe both. Like his parents are dead and now you're going to be a good influence. So that's why you're moving in with this particular aunt.
I do remember Pete saying something along the lines of, oh, my aunt is all alone with her kids. I got to be there for her. It was kind of like, it was a good guy move.
Good guy move?
Yeah, we come to find throughout the story, really like the entire conflict is that Pete becomes a bad boy.
He goes to Chicago and falls in with the wrong crowd, and he changed after he got arrested. That's what he says. You haven't been. His aunt is like scolding him. Is like, you haven't been the same since you got arrested. It's like, well, yeah.
I mean, when we were watching this, I had a few questions as we were just watching. One, how fucking old are they? Because it wasn't very clear, and that age gap was very obvious. But then when he gets arrested and turns into a bad crowd, it's been like 3 months.
Yeah.
It's been like 3 months, and he's had this complete character shift.
He went from Buttercreamer to bad boy, just like that. Like 3 months. That's all you need.
The most amusing thing to me is how apparently Mormons view what a bad boy from Chicago in a gang looks like.
A Cholo. He dressed up as a Cholo.
He dresses like a Cholo.
Yes.
Changes his name to Valdez.
Yeah. And then he speaks with a Brooklyn accent.
Yeah.
Like they don't even have the accent right. It's like if they went to Chicago and found out everybody just sounds like they're from Canada, they were like, oh God, this isn't what we're going for.
Yeah, so I grew up in the Chicago area. That's where I spent most of my life. But when I first moved here, I would get shit on for my accent all the time. People would be like, where are you from? What is that accent? That I feel that the Chicago accent is pretty unique. Like if you watch the Blues Brothers, you know how like Dan Aykroyd talks in that movie is like a really exaggerated version of it.
Yeah.
But it is pretty accurate. But like Pete talks straight up just like New York. Like
we asked each other, like, was he in? What kind of gang is he in? Is he in the mafia?
Yeah,
right?
Because he's like talking about the spaghetti being not as good or something.
The spaghetti's not as good here. Like, what the fuck happened to you?
Or his aunt makes it with ketchup.
Yeah, but she makes spaghetti with ketchup, but it's no big deal.
I feel like he's a young kid actor channeling Al Pacino. That's like really what he was doing.
They told him to watch some gangster films, and instead of like the only thing that their blockbuster had was Goodfellas and like The Godfather, he's like, all right, those are gangsters.
He's trying his best, okay?
And in fairness, I thought Pete was like the one highlight for me of the whole. Just I love the acting, like just how overacting it was and how like bad it was. He's like in an argument with Scott, and he's like, "You never once asked me what happened in Chicago. You never once asked me." And I was like, "I love this.
That's
this is
bullshit,
awesome."
Though, because in the beginning of the movie, Pete moves away in like the first couple minutes of the movie. It's like the first thing that happens.
Yeah,
and then we see a montage of like, so Scott and Pete were like best friends. And so Scott is writing him letters and he's all like, hey, Pete, how's Chicago? Blah, blah, blah. And he's writing him and getting letters back. But then over time, he stops getting letters back. And so he's like, what's going on with Pete? He's gone. But then Pete comes back. And this is where the Buttercream Gang notices that he's changed.
Got some new threads.
Mm-hmm.
It's a direct quote. Threads.
Yeah.
He doesn't seem to have the same values anymore.
The first thing they do when they meet up with Pete after he gets back is they all go to the grocery store where Pete used to work. And first is my treat.
Mm-hmm. He's going to get him all
like,
some sody pops.
There's the one kid. I forget which one it is. I think it was Lanny. Lanny ends up buying the soda pop. But then while he's doing that, Pete goes and steals a bunch of Hostess fruit pies.
Which are like
$1?
Like $1 a piece? Come on, man.
And then one thing I loved about that was when Scott, who noticed it but didn't say anything, when he brings it up to the other Buttercreamers, he says, I know he didn't pay for him because he doesn't have that kind of money. And they said, well, maybe his grandpa gave him money. They said, his grandpa doesn't have that kind of money either. Right. And I'm like, for 4 Hostess fruit pies? I guess. How?
How are you so aware of his grandpa's finances?
I know, right? Like, are they struggling that bad that he could not afford 4 Hostess fruit pies from the corner store?
What's the name of the guy who owns the place? Mr. Graff?
Mr. Graff, yeah, something like that.
It's a very small town that they live in.
This
very
is
rural.
A very small town.
Yeah, so I just assume it's a farming community.
Everyone had a big ass house.
Yeah.
I noticed. I'm like, everyone's got a big ass house. Like, dang. All right.
The young blonde children can just run freely in the fields, and they're playing jump rope in the yard.
They count to 10.
Yeah, the kid who's jumping the rope just like falls down, and all the other kids fall down.
And they all start laughing.
Is this like a small town rule?
I was like, is that a game? Is that a rule? Like, I haven't jumped rope in like 25 years, at least not with other people.
Yeah, I was like, did he fall down and they were falling down to make it like less embarrassing for him?
Or are they like mocking it? Are they mocking him? Or is it like, oh, we're all falling down. It's funny.
I don't.
Is it a game where they all imitate whatever the person does? I don't.
There's no rules.
They should have played Kick the Can also. I had to Google what the rules for Kick the Can were.
Why did you have to Google that?
I don't know what the rules for Kick the Can are. Do you?
No, but I just love that you have the need, the desire, like, okay, I see this game being played. I have to know what the rules are right now. I'm going to Google it.
Look, none of the rules in this universe are really explained to us, so we're forced to kind of figure it out.
Right, the whole entire, because at first it shows them like jumping rope, counting to 10, and then them dropping. And I'm like, okay, weird. Then the next shot shows them playing Kick the Can. She kicks the can, and then she starts covering her eyes and counting. And I said, is that how you play Kick the Can? I've only heard of this game.
Yeah, and so we're like, well, maybe it's like hide and seek, but like kicking the can is how you initiate the countdown. And
we found out, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Like,
what was that? You found like an article talking about it's a game of stealth.
Okay, the Wikipedia article says
Kick the
Can is a game of agility and stealth. It's a combination of tag, cops and robbers, and hide and seek.
It's basically just Metal Gear Solid.
Wow. It's you kick the can, and wherever the can lands is where the jail is. Everyone hides, and when you get caught, you go to the jail. If one of the people that are still hiding can make it to the can and either flip it or kick it, depending on the rules, they can release the prisoners. Sometimes all at once, or sometimes whoever was held the longest gets to go back out and hide. But if you can't do it and get caught, otherwise you go back into jail. So it is a game of agility and stealth.
Yeah, this small town...
It's literally a white picket fence town. It shows them painting a picket fence white.
Emphasis on the white.
Every actor is white in the
They fixed that in the sequel, which we won't go into, but we all did watch.
Yeah.
We will get into it briefly, but...
They noticed as soon as they put on the sequel, and I said, there's a black girl and a Hispanic boy. Yep. Someone noticed.
Yeah.
Someone noticed when they were watching.
Good on them for...
We actually wanted to talk about the second movie as our primary film, but as we watched it, we were like, we can't work with this.
I tapped out.
It's so bad. The Buttercream Gang kind of has like a so bad it's good quality to it.
Things make sense enough. The second one, things are just happening.
Shit just flies off the rails.
The second one, things are happening while at the same time nothing is happening. It's one of those.
It's very boring. It's supposed to be like an adventure film. What's the title of the movie again? The sequel?
Secrets of the Treasure Mountain or something like that?
Yeah, Secret of Treasure Mountain. Mm-hmm. So you're like, oh, cool, adventure film. Treasure.
This one killed the franchise.
Yeah.
They tried making it to a franchise. We're gonna just throw these kids in all kinds of wacky adventures, and no.
We like to call it the Buttercream Gang extended universe.
they get back. They start hanging out with Pete again. And they're questioning, like, why is Pete back? And then they say, maybe school lets out early in Chicago, which means this all happens within the same school year.
Yeah, he's not gone long at all. And if he is, they do a really bad job of demonstrating that.
I want to know how small of a town this is, because no matter where they went, they were running into each other.
Mhm.
Like, how small of a town is this where you can't go anywhere without running into that guy that you're trying to avoid?
Well, you know what, Henry? I'll tell you. I just looked it up. So this takes place in Elk Ridge, Utah. The population was 2,436 at the 2010 census. And this was filmed in
Like
1991. So it was probably less than that at the time. So yeah, very small. And it's next to a place called Loafer Mountain. And I think that's really funny.
Is Loafer Mountain where the secret is? Is that the secret mountain? Secret treasure? Probably, let's be
Looks
honest.
like it.
It probably is. That looks just like what it was in film. So Scott calls Pete out, and they start having a discussion about how Scott doesn't know what happened in Chicago and stuff, right? And they start butting heads about that because Pete doesn't want to be Scott's friend anymore.
So the Buttercreamers, they do all kinds of tasks for people around town. They mow lawns, they deliver the newspapers, they break into widows' houses to get them off the ground.
Oh, wait, that's another thing. How come all three of them have fucking paper routes if it's such a small town?
Really quick, Elk Ridge, Utah has their own website, and it's really bad and hard to read. But I did see that
Look at that
here
compression on that JPEG.
by 1980, there were 99 homes built in the town and a population of 381 people. In 1990, the year before Buttercream Gang was filmed,
Perfect.
the census reported that there were 771 residents.
John, I think that's around the same amount of people that were in our graduating class.
Right.
That's the entire town of Elk Ridge.
All right, you know what? I'll give it a pass then, because like at the same time, I remember going to school and being in the same building, and there's some people I never saw that graduated with us.
That's true too.
That's good information. They're like, damn,
Mhm.
that's crazy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is small, very small.
So when Pete comes back, right, they start hanging out still. And I gotta hand it to Pete for a minute, because he obviously changed and grew a lot. Not for the better, but he grew as a person. He grew out of being a buttercreamer.
Mhm.
But he's hanging out with his old friends, and he's like, hey guys, yeah, let's hang out and ride bikes and stuff. And he was doing all these childish things still with the other buttercreamers. And eventually like, oh, I gotta dip out. I gotta go do a thing. And that's when he started his own gang, right?
There was like a transitionary period where
Yeah.
he was kind of hanging out with like half of
Yeah, because he was like
them,
dropping them to
dividing his
hang out
time.
sometimes to go hang out with the other kids. Now,
Ooh, where did those
yeah, exactly.
kids come from?
Where did they come from? I have it in my notes. Where did this other gang come from? It's these two other kids. He starts terrorizing the entire town of fucking 700 people with these two other kids. But
Who we don't see at all. Like when Pete is still in Elk Ridge, there's no sign of any other gang. Everything
Right.
seems to
it
be
seems like
totally
a perfectly
peaceful.
small, peaceful town.
He
Yeah.
only gets involved in gang activity when he moves to Chicago. And then when he comes back and he's all ganged out, suddenly there's like two other kids and they form their own gang. And it's like, well, where did these people come from?
Yeah, they're very like minor. They have very few lines, if any at all. Like
The only lines are them taunting the girls' glasses.
Yeah, they're just cronies.
They literally don't have names in the credits.
Really?
Yeah, they're marked as Pete's Gang Boy 1, Pete's Gang Boy 2.
Wow. The activities that they get into, some of them are pretty awesome.
When they
Hanging out
started
with
that fire, I was like, yes!
Yeah, we do see fire.
And like
Yes.
smashing the glass on the railroad tracks. I'm like, I could do that for hours. Like, that's...
when that was happening, and Pete was like, come on, hit it, make a toss. Like, why can't you hit it? I was like, that wasn't written. That was totally off the cuff. You know it is. He was doing it in character, but like they were really missing. They hit the first couple and broke the bottles, and the other gang members started missing, and Pete's egging him on. I was like, how much you want to bet that he's like, we only got enough bottles to do like one take. You're messing this up. We only got 2 bottles broken. What are you doing?
Al Pacino improvising.
What are you doing here? Come on.
I learned a lot of things in Chicago. How to throw bottles on railroad tracks.
They start just terrorizing everybody in the school, right? That's one thing he starts doing.
Mhm.
And then they go to the playground and they pull these 2 girls off of the seesaw to go use the seesaw when they're like 16 years old.
Yeah.
I'm sawing now.
Because the Buttercream Gang, even though they're like 14, 15, they hang out with a lot of really young kids.
Yeah.
Like I'm talking like 8 or 9-year-old kids.
But I mean, if there's only 700 people in your fucking town, like, you got a choice?
Yeah.
If you're 14 and the kid that also likes baseball's 10, you're gonna hang out with the kid that likes baseball because he's 10, and
I
that 4-year
guess.
gap is you're just gonna make do with it.
I don't know. I feel that the Buttercream Gang is kind of, they have like Peter Pan syndrome where they're afraid to grow up. Even though we see them take on a lot of responsibilities that, you know, in my opinion, should be handled by the fucking police.
We'll get to that.
We'll get to that. They take on these responsibilities, but at the end of the day, like they're very childish. And so I can kind of see why Pete, being slightly older, you know, he's almost an adult. So yeah, hanging out with like 14, 15-year-olds who just want to like do their paper routes and whatever, it's not as fun. But at the same time, Pete turns into a total asshole.
Yeah.
He and his friends literally start harassing Scott, like the legal definition of harassment.
It turns into a harassment off. First, is that before or after they jump him?
I don't remember.
They start taunting the girl that
Margaret, I think
Margaret?
it was.
She was like one of the few, I don't know, bright spots with her sarcasm. And like, she had some good little one-liners in there. And then she took her glasses off to go to the dance.
And then she never wears them again the rest of the movie. And I almost like didn't recognize her. He's doing the paper route and he throws the paper and like hits her right in the face when she's sitting on the porch. And he's like, oh, sorry, Margaret, I didn't see you there. She's like, what, am I invisible? But then like Scott owes her a favor.
or something. I don't know.
Why does he owe her a favor?
I think she gave him some information about gangs so that he could learn more about what Pete was dealing with. I think that's what it was.
Because
And
there's
then-
a scene when they're all sitting in the treehouse. They have this like sick treehouse where they have their Buttercream Gang meetings.
That treehouse was dope. They got a cow skull. Did you see the cow skull like mounted up? Like, yo, that's rad.
Yeah,
That's brutal as fuck.
So like Margaret runs up one day and she's like, hey Scott, so I'm here to cash in on that favor you owe me. He's like, yeah, what is it? And she's like, you're gonna go to the dance with me tonight.
Tonight.
And it's like, dang, dude, she just gave you no choice.
And then she takes the glasses off when they're going to the dance. And she's like, what, you didn't want to go to the dance with me? And Scott was like, no, I wanted to go. And she's like, well, then what's your problem? And she's like, I've just never seen you this pretty before. And it's like, okay.
Yeah.
Was that all in one day? Because that's the same day she gets harassed and he gets, yeah.
They were terrorizing her earlier in the day.
Yeah, it would have been before the whole thing worked out. And the gang sharks on bikes
Yeah, they're
Yeah.
circling around Margaret, just
taunting her.
taunting her.
And Scott comes in and stands up for her
Mhm.
and then tells Margaret to go home. And then
Do they beat him up there?
they jump him later, I think after the dance.
Yeah, at the dance, Pete's gang gets into some literal domestic terrorism.
They throw explosives into the dance. I mean, they're firecrackers, but still, like,
Still.
Yeah.
I was like, that would be domestic terrorism in this day and age. And
Oh, yeah.
if there wasn't such a small town, people would be running because, there's a mass shooting
Oh,
happening.
yeah, there's just like
Yeah.
a big explosion. They all just like scream
They
and
go,
then like go
"Oh!"
back
and
to
they-
normal.
they-
And
they
I'm like,
everyone just steps back. They're like, where was that?
yeah, carry on. And I'm like,
No.
nowadays,
Yeah.
That's not gonna happen.
no.
But that starts the war because Scott comes to the window, right? And then Pete's like, Scott, it's on. I told you it's going to be on. And then the next day he jumps him because they're...
Well, Pete doesn't jump him. He makes his friends jump him because he can't do it himself.
Because Scott's, pushing his bike around in a field, and Pete comes out, starts getting his face, says, "Don't you ever talk to me like that. You're never going to talk to me like that. Get him, boys." And then they like jump out of the fucking woods. And they just start beating him up. And that's the next day is a picnic, like a whole town picnic. And he comes like stumbling back to the picnic, bleeding. And his friend's like, "Scott, you missed everything. Holy crap, what happened to your face?" And he explains it, and that starts the harassment war between the two of them.
Yeah. They're basically like rival gangs at this point.
Scott's dad talked to Scott about it. And he told Scott...
It's a Vietnam story.
Yeah, he has some story about Vietnam and some guy that just always turned the other cheek because he'd always introduce himself as like, "Hi, my name's Greg and I'm a Christian."
Yeah.
And I guess everybody would make fun of him for that. But like the scene prior to that, we saw the dad like leading the family in prayer. So like, I'm not sure. Why are you making fun of this guy for being a Christian?
I get the feeling that Scott's dad is one of those guys that was like anti-religious for a long time and then like
saw people die in Vietnam.
And then came around to it. And now he lives in a small town in Utah.
I could see that happening.
Yeah.
So then he basically gives him this story and tells him, kill him with kindness, essentially, more or less.
Yep.
So Scott is doing things like just going about his life, but Pete is interfering and harassing like during the big baseball game, like taunting him.
Let's see. Okay, so...
I forget what other ways he harassed him.
So when Scott's doing his paper route, Pete and his gang is behind him picking up every newspaper that he throws and then piling them all in his yard. So he has to go do his paper route all over again. Then they're planting flowers in Widow Jenkins' yard. We didn't really talk about Widow Jenkins.
We'll get to it. We'll get back to that.
Okay, so they're planting flowers in her yard and they come in with their bikes and run over all the flowers. Then there's so much. There's like a whole montage.
It's a montage of things that are happening, but here's why I was asking how small of a town it is, because Pete's gang decided to just be really nice and kill him with kindness. So they told the shopkeeper that Pete was stealing. And he was like, "Well, yeah, you should have told me earlier, but I knew. And the reason I wasn't doing anything about it is because Scott needs love right now. And that's what Pete needs love right now. And that's what he really, really needs. So next time he comes in, I'm just going to give him the soda because then he's not stealing it."
I see where they're getting at with that, but I feel like that would only work in like a small town.
Right. So
it's a little bit of a fairy tale.
So Pete tries to steal Scott's bike, and then he's like, "You know what? You can have it.
Take it.
Take my bike." If I was Scott's dad, I'd be like, "What the fuck, Scott? That was $150 fucking dollars. How the fuck are you gonna do your paper route now? Do you know how many hours that takes me at the fucking factory I work at?" Like, I'm assuming he works at a factory. You see him working
He's
on
probably a farmer.
You see him working on like an old ass truck and other shit. It's like, do you know how long it takes me to get that bike for you? Are you kidding? You just give it to that fucking kid? And I don't feel like it would do anything because I feel like if you're some gangbanger from Chicago and you try to steal a bike, someone hands it over, you're like, "Well, darn, I didn't get the satisfaction of stealing the bike." No, you're like, "All right, easy, free bike."
Didn't they make some comment where he was like, "That bike would have gotten stolen in 3 seconds back in Chicago"?
I loved all the references to life back in Chicago.
Yeah.
The big city.
So funny.
The big city in Chicago.
And I think it's really funny because, like, Utah, the closest, like, bad big city is what? Like, Vegas?
Yeah.
Or LA? Like a big... You're talking about, like, a big city that you could paint as, like, somewhere that's bad? Like Vegas, right? It's much closer to Utah. It's like Chicago or even New York. They could have said...
I was going to say New York.
If they said he went to New York...
so many more things would have made sense.
So many more things.
So many things would have made more sense than going to Chicago.
His accent, for one.
His accent, that's hands down. Him being a bit of a cholo. I think there's more of a Hispanic gangster presence in fucking like it would make more sense
That
going to
was
like LA. But like I still
Yeah.
feel
He
I
dressed
still
like he was from East LA.
Yes.
Talked like he was from New York, and then
feel like even going to New York, you could say, okay, he got mixed up with the Cholo gang in New York. Fine, that makes more sense than fucking Chicago.
Yeah, especially because like New York is literally the most populated city in our entire country.
Exactly.
Like anything goes. You could make anything up.
You have in New York, you have a little town for every ethnicity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You have Little Italy. Like even white people need their own little version of it in fucking New York.
You kind of do in Chicago too.
So that would still make more sense than going to Chicago. But anyway.
Yeah, none of it makes sense.
So during this whole entire like feud between them, they're following Scott around to harass him. And the way they harass him makes sense for them to follow him around. All right, he's helping out the old lady. We're going to undo what he did. And that's essentially what it all comes down to. They're just going to undo everything that Scott is doing.
Mm-hmm.
But when they're just like hanging around, Scott's also there. When they're like at the playground, Scott's there to like harass them and be nice. When they're like hanging out by the barn, just sitting on the ground outside the barn drinking soda, Scott drives by with his new bike. I'm assuming he got a new bike somehow. Paper route money. And he literally throws a gift wrapped picture of them, of all them together as the Buttercream Gang in a picture frame. Gift wrapped. Like they threw it to him. Like that makes no sense to me. Like,
I get the whole kill him with kindness thing. I get where they're coming from with it, but I feel it's just not played realistically whatsoever.
No.
I think that if you have a friend that you grew up with and they get to a point where they're not the same, they don't want to hang out with you anymore. As a matter of fact, they actively dislike you. You don't have to constantly try to get them to be your friend.
I was really feeling that he was trying way too hard and that I would have been like, Scott, fuck off. Like if that was happening to me, like, dude, I told you we're not friends anymore. Stop trying.
Yeah.
Like I get it's one thing like to give once the feud stop or for Scott to want him to stop fucking with him.
Mm-hmm.
But Scott was like, be my friend, please.
Yeah. You'll always be my friend, P.
Yeah.
And it's just kind of sad, like from both sides.
From
like
both sides.
I would have been like, no, dude, no.
I think like the question is like, what does Pete like want? Like out of all of this?
He wanted somebody to tell him no.
Oh yeah.
That's the climax. We'll get to that though, because we do need to touch on where the fuck were the police?
Yeah, okay, so the Buttercream Gang is in charge of they do like not
all
only
sorts of good deeds.
do they do good deeds, they also do vigilante fucking justice.
So old lady, right?
Widow Jenkins.
She fell again. So they literally break into her house by hoisting one of them up with a rope, and they pull him up to get him into the second floor for some reason.
Because the front door is locked. They can't get in. So they have to find another way in. So they have to go up on the second.
Break the fucking window. You turn break.
They would never break a window.
If she fell, time is of the essence. What if she fell and she's bleeding out?
Exactly. So this is why they should have called a fucking ambulance.
Call the police. But no, they're like, no.
We got this.
We got to rig up a rope and a pulley, and we're going to use our 14-year-old bodies to pull the lightest one up. And now we can't do it like last time because Pete's not here, so we don't have as much weight on the fulcrum point to get us up there.
It's so bad. And like, okay, they call her Widow Jenkins. It's like, why do you have to constantly remind? Like, there's just this theme throughout this whole movie that's like, hey, let's remind people that their loved ones are dead at every possible opportunity.
Sorry, your mom's dead. So I'm just sorry, this is the Wendy's.
But yeah, she's like the resident old lady who needs help. So we're always like, buying her groceries and planting her flowers and shit.
And they're helping her out again, but that doesn't make, like I said, that doesn't make sense where all these other kids help him reach that final point by tackling everyone on the rope, and that's not how that works. that would have just made him drop to the floor and break both of his legs, because he would have he was on the second floor at that point. He would have dropped down and just broken his legs.
Yeah, so they get in her house and they help her up, and I don't know. It happens again
and then
later
I
in the
think
movie.
she sends him to buy groceries immediately after.
Yeah. She's totally fine. Like
she gets up, they're like, let me help you up. They're like, all right, yeah, thanks.
And that's it.
That's it.
Maybe that's why they don't call the police. Maybe Widow Jenkins is just over dramatic and like
maybe it's not like a life or death, but it's just her arthritis. She's like a turtle.
She rolls on her back. You gotta just
somehow I think it's the little girl always knows like when someone's in trouble.
Yeah, she's always a little.
And she's like Lassie.
Nobody. She's like a little Lassie. Nobody had cell phones, so the only way for Widow Jenkins to have the kids come get her groceries was to fall on the ground, and then magically the little girl knows that she's fallen and gets all the kids to come help. And
she's like, help, Buttercream Gang! It's Widow Jenkins. She fell again. It's like, yeah, but how do you know that?
Because you were looking through her window at the time,
just creeping.
She's like,
just like
maybe
any
she's
day
like
now.
their resident Harriet the Spy or something, where she's just like checking on everyone.
I mean, wouldn't Widow Jenkins really just need to like call Scott's dad and just like, hey,
or
I don't want to go to the store. Can you send Scott and his friends to go get my stuff? It's one of those days, you know.
She could just call the fucking
flashes.
police.
Haven't you heard of a thing called showmanship?
So the other time they should have been calling the fucking police was she runs up, Harriet the Spy runs up Harriet the Spy runs up and says, Pete's house is being robbed.
Yeah, what the fuck?
And they're like, oh, and they all start going, and she's like, and we said, why aren't they calling the police?
Yeah, there's an active robbery going on.
And then Harry the Spy says, shouldn't we call the police? And like, no, we should go investigate first. I'm like, you're 14.
Yeah.
This is official Buttercream business.
Exactly.
So it turns out they go in there, right? And they dogpile onto the robber.
Yeah, so they sneak up to Pete's house and they look through the window and they see this active hostage situation taking place where there's some older man holding Pete like in a fucking grip.
Headlock.
Yeah, in like a headlock. And he's just like
a stocking on his head so his identity is concealed.
Yeah. He like a sheer like nude colored like you know who that is. But he's like give me the money or he's gonna get it or whatever. And then Pete's grandpa's like, it's in the safety deposit box. I don't have it. Whatever. And so the Buttercream Gang is like, oh shit, this is serious. So they barge in to try to stop.
The robber comes out because I think they're gonna go
to the
bank. I think that's where they're gonna go to the bank to get to the safe deposit box.
Oh, that's right. And they were waiting outside for him.
First of all, why do they telegraph their attack by yelling, dog pile, before they jump on him?
And then this army of small children just runs out and like tackles this guy. I'm like, what if he had a weapon? Like, first of all, no one in Elk Ridge, Utah has a weapon or a phone or a TV or anything. Like,
somebody's gotta have a weapon because that cow that they have in their treehouse did not die of its own.
Maybe it did.
Maybe.
I don't know. But like just the bad guy activities that we see in this movie are totally like not threatening at all.
Except that fire. That was nice.
Yeah, the fire was cool.
I gotta believe like the Vietnam War vet probably has some kind of weapon.
Yeah.
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 He's got to defend his family and his farm, you know?
But why isn't there any police? I mean, a town of 700. I would guess it'd be like a county sheriff.
You have like one guy at least.
We did see the police once.
At the very end.
But before we get to the end, so they dogpile on the guy, and then they're like, Pete, we saved you. And he was like,
you didn't save me from nothing.
Yeah, he was like, this is all planned.
From nothing.
It was all a plan.
You ruined it.
Pete's plan was to stage a break-in and a robbery so they could get his grandpa to get the money or whatever out of the bank.
So he could go back to Chicago.
Yes.
I don't know why he couldn't just ask his grandpa. Be like, Grandpa, I want to go back to Chicago. This is bullshit.
Yeah, right?
Like,
Miss that deep dish.
I'm sure. I'm
Chicago
sure
and
his
Stony
grandpa will be
deep
like,
dish.
thank fuck, get out of my house. You are ruining this town.
Yeah, right.
Take those 2 kids with you that materialized out of nowhere.
I think Scott actually says something like that. He's like, he should just go back to Chicago where he belongs.
Yeah.
You know? But
That's where all the bad people go. So then Pete runs away, and I mean, a bunch of other shit happens, but the climax of the movie
Meltdown.
is that Pete has a fucking meltdown. He goes nuts
Because he goes to rob the grocery store.
to get his money because he's so desperate to leave.
to like rob the cashier, not just stealing the fruit pies. He goes after the money and what's in the cash register.
Yeah, and so he's sticking up this grocery store
Which is full of people.
with no weapon.
No weapon.
Nothing threatening. He just walks up and says, "Give me the money, old man." And
then
he's like,
It's like, well, here, yeah, I got
he's like-
$217 or something.
He's like, no, give me everything in the register. He's like, okay, yeah, you need some money? I'll give you some money, Pete. And he's like, what the fuck is wrong with you? What is wrong with this town? You don't just give someone the money when they're robbing you.
Yeah.
What is wrong with you? What is
Which,
wrong with all of you?
you know what? I agree with that sentiment. Like,
No.
how the fuck does he just walk in and he's like, give me the money? He's like, yeah, okay.
I mean, you don't know what he's got. That's what you're supposed to do. You're just like, all right, yeah,
That is true, but also, like,
you know it's Scott.
this kid. Or you know it's
Yeah, it's Pete, yeah.
You know this kid. He used to work for you. Like, you know he doesn't have anything that can hurt you.
You know he literally doesn't have anything.
Yeah.
And that's why you're going to give it to him.
You could
though.
just tell him to leave. What's he gonna do? Like,
Well, he trashed the store.
yeah, he loses his
And
shit.
They all come because they all come into the store, right? The
Mhm.
Buttercream Gang miraculously comes into the grocery
Because
store.
I think they chased after him when he ran away from his house after they foiled his plan. Pete runs away.
Why did they bother chasing him? The plan's foiled. Like, all right, I'm just
Because
gonna-
they don't know when to fucking leave Pete alone. Like
like
But-
straight up.
I think it's scenes like the grocery store scene that makes this movie so much better than the second one.
yeah.
Because there's like an actual like conflict, and this kid is actually like really struggling with something, and he just wants some form of boundaries or consequences.
Because
for
that's what he
his
starts talking.
actions.
That's exactly what he wants. What does Pete want this whole time? He wanted somebody to tell him no, somebody to stop him, somebody to listen.
Yeah.
That's all he wanted, really.
Yeah, because so Pete gets this like fucking stick and he starts like smashing all the things off the shelves and making a huge ruckus, and Scott is just like, "What do you want, Pete? I don't get it. What do you want?"
Yeah, and Pete says, "I want you to hate me," and Scott's like, "Hate you? Why?" And he's like, "Because I hate myself." And I was like, "Oh my
Yeah,
god!
that
Like
was
this
deep.
is."
I feel like
Wow.
somebody else wrote this scene.
It's like you have so much like corny, cheesy like dialogue through the whole thing, and then all of a sudden you have like stuff like this, and you're just like, "Oh, all right."
It turned
like,
into
there's,
a Lifetime movie real quick.
After school special.
Yes. Yeah,
100%.
absolutely. And so then basically Pete goes back to Chicago, and then we find out at the very end that he has
Wait, before we get there,
wait, the ending, the editing of the ending
Oh
was
my-
so funny.
So
to
then
me.
we see the shot of, we finally see some fucking police action.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
see the
We
police.
see the police pull up to the house, and we see Pete's grandpa get out of the passenger seat, and Scott comes in the house, and we see Pete's grandpa. We see an officer.
Oh no, I
We
forgot
see-
about this.
We see a pastor, and we see Scott's whole family, and we see a bunch of the neighborhood friends, and then Scott's dad's like, "Scott, I just want you to know, it doesn't always turn out like this." And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh God, what did Pete do
And
now?
Scott's like, "What happened?"
And then
They string him along for like
And
And
then
wait,
Margaret's
and-
like, "I'm so proud of you, Scott. You
She
did
says-
the right thing."
yeah, she was like, "You did the right thing, Scott." And I'm like, okay, yeah, you were still trying to be nice when this guy was a dick. I get it. And then they start reading a letter from Pete's aunt who said,
well, Scott's dad said, I think we ought to have the Reverend read that letter. He's better at this stuff than I am.
That was the other part, I think. Was that the letter? Because somebody read the letter and there was also a newspaper clipping. And then we got to the newspaper clipping. Somebody else read that.
Yeah,
I don't remember who.
So Scott read the newspaper clipping and the pastor read the letter.
Yeah, after his dad's like, the pastor is more experienced with this sort of thing. So you're still bracing.
You're just like,
Yeah.
You're like,
You're on the edge of your
he
seat.
is dead right
it's like
Yeah.
somebody's dead or in jail.
Right?
That's what you're expecting from bad boy Cholo Mr. Valdez. Right?
Yeah. So then Scott reads the
Oh.
fucking newspaper article and it's just like,
Good guy gang started by Pete.
yeah.
Congratulated by the mayor of Chicago.
I have the quote here. It says, today at 2:00, the mayor of Chicago honored. And at this point, I'm just like, what is going on? For the first time in the city's history, a member of a gang. The gang was Pete Turner. Mr. Turner's gang is rather unusual. Mr. Turner says, if you accept yourself for who you are and truly love others, a lot of good will happen. And then, yeah, he starts his own branch of the Buttercream Gang in Chicago.
Like that meltdown happened, and he just needed to get off his chest. Apparently, he goes back to
He
being.
needed to see a therapist, and I think that we can all agree that
Yeah.
after your parents die, that's something you should go through.
Yeah. Dude, it's just crazy. Like, what an ending.
Yeah.
So it was like at the very last moment you find out that Pete returns to who he was before.
Yeah.
It was just a phase.
It's just a phase.
Yeah. So the lesson that we're supposed to take from the Buttercream Gang is treat people with kindness, do the right thing, blah, blah, blah. Well, at the end of the day, the Buttercream Gang is a drama. It is a drama film. It is slice of life drama, like Henry, like you said, an after school special type thing. Teaching these, Christian values, the turn the other cheek is basically the whole premise of the entire movie. So this movie got really popular among certain crowds, mostly like religious families and stuff. So Feature Films for Families thought it would be a splendid idea to make a sequel. And so you, dear listener, you probably think, well, where do they go from here? Maybe they talk about the Chicago chapter of the Buttercream Gang. Maybe it's the next generation of the Buttercream Gang. No, it is not what you expect at all. It's actually like a Goonies ripoff.
It's a Goonies ripoff, and the box art rips off Indiana Jones. That font is totally stolen from Indiana Jones. One reason I think it didn't catch on isn't just because the movie's absolute fucking trash. I'll be honest, when I grabbed it off the shelf, I didn't realize it was the Buttercream Gang. When I saw it at the thrift store,
Oh, really?
I got it just because I saw the Feature Films for Family. And that was like,
and the cover
yes.
is very obviously like, it's an Indiana Jones ripoff, but like all of the characters are drawn on it, and like the artwork is really bad.
So it's one of those things that's, we got some knockoff Indiana Jones from Feature Films for Family. And it wasn't until I got home, I was like, oh, this is another Buttercream Gang video? They made more than one?
Yeah.
So it was not obvious at all. So I think their graphic designer failed on that. So even people that would have wanted to buy it didn't know what it was.
Yeah, so I believe that the sequel came out only like 2 years later.
1993.
But Pete's not in it. Unfortunately, but we're left with like the rest of the cast with a couple additions. They're,
they added some people of color.
Yeah.
2 people
diversity,
of color.
a little bit more diverse.
They sprinkle them in there. We got a little black girl and we got a Hispanic boy.
Yeah. And the tone of the movie is completely different from the first one. It's very goofy and like silly, and It starts off with Spanish conquistadors bearing treasure.
I may have been under the influence last night when we started watching it, but
yeah, we started drinking like before we even watched, because we watched them back to back. We started drinking like before the first one, so by the time we got to this one, we were just like,
I forgot what movie we were watching. When first it was like I was like, okay, and then we see the Buttercream. I was like, Allison, I'll be honest, I forgot what fucking movie we were watching.
Because when it
goes on for so long.
The first several minutes is just like Elk Ridge in 1532 or something like that. And these Spanish conquistadors are like something with treasure, and they're in a cave. And one group says to the other group that like, because we have the treasure, you have to do what we say for the rest of time or whatever. And there are some people who still abide by these rules to this day for some reason.
Sidebar, you know what that reminds me of, actually?
What?
The beginning of Surviving Edged Weapons. Because it starts out with like first edged weapon attack with two fucking cavemen.
Oh my God.
And then it takes place in modern Milwaukee.
Yeah.
The rest of the movie takes place in modern Milwaukee. So it just reminds me of that.
Oh my God. Yeah.
Which is a much better movie. Watch Surviving Edged Weapons.
Yeah.
Like, get your hands on a copy of that.
The second movie also focuses on Eldon, who is the fattest one of all.
Yeah, he's kind of like the comic relief.
And in this one, it's like when he had this like issue with his self-esteem.
Yeah.
He was like, I can't do anything right. I gotta find the treasure to finally do something right. And it's like, where was this last movie? Like, you seemed perfectly fine.
It starts with him not being able to water ski.
Oh God,
that's his big conflict.
You know we fucking have left out this entire fucking time? How much Eldon would sing.
Oh my God, what's that fucking
what's
quote? You got the right one, baby.
You got the right one, baby.
He would sing that repeatedly throughout the movie as like a cheer or like just any kind of reasoning.
And we were like,
what is that? What is song is that? And we find out he's quoting a goddamn Pepsi commercial from 1990
with
starring Ray Charles, yeah.
Who was in the very last Crash Dummies PSA.
Yeah, we made a pretty off-color joke about
everybody in
that being blind.
Yeah.
The joke my dad always told me was, have you ever seen Ray Charles' house?
Just the more we do this podcast, I'm finding there's so many crossovers. I don't know if it's just because we review stuff that's all in like the early 1990s pretty much, like that same span of time that we see a lot of the same actors and production companies and stuff like that. But yeah, this Diet Pepsi campaign was 1990 to 1993, so this was like very relevant at the time. But if you're watching it now, you're like, what the fuck are they talking about?
If you're young, this is what we had to do before memes. We just had to, all we did was just yell quotes from movies, TV shows, and commercials at each other.
Yeah.
That's it.
What's up?
Can you hear me now? You've got mail.
My wife gives me a hard time because I'll literally just like talk in slogans. Like, every like business I drive by, I'll just like say the tagline for it or something. And so like every time I drive by Dairy Queens, I'm like, cool treat. Ty eats cool treats. Nice.
That reminds me, actually, one of the not one of the first times I met your wife, but one of the first times that we all went out to dinner together. She pointed that out to me. She's having to watch all these movies because you and I and you and Lee and everybody else, all of us within our like friend circle, can just talk in movie quotes to each other. Yeah. And she grew up very, very Christian, or she did not have access to the same amount of movies. She had a DVD player that
it was
she had a Clean Flicks DVD player, which has a thumb drive, which has data on it. It reads the movie, and if it has the matching metadata, it knows when to skip scenes, when to mute the scene.
Oh my God.
She told me she watched Titanic on it, and it was like 45 minutes long.
Holy shit.
That reminds me, I got the DVD of Freddy Got Fingered. the other day.
Yeah.
But that has the PG cut of the movie that he submitted to the MPAA just for lulz. It's 3 minutes long. Speaking of growing up very Christian and watching these kind of movies, though, John, you have a lot of information on this.
Well, here's the thing. This particular movie is like a Mormon company, but they don't like expressly say that. But I feel very fortunate in that my dad, all of my movie tastes came from my dad. And my dad, we didn't watch like crappy movies. Like I would consider this like a pretty crappy movie.
Yeah.
But like I grew up on like 70s and 80s like SNL comedy stars. And so I grew up with the Bill Murray, the Steve Martin, and Chevy Chase. And like that's what my dad liked. And so that's what I grew up on. And so as far as like kind of the crappy Christian movies and TV shows of the time, there's like some of that I watched, but a lot of it was just always so bad that we like the good that they were doing or like trying to do didn't outweigh just like how artistically and technically bad it was. And so that's something that I've always struggled with or like have always thought about is like, why is it that like religious media or Christian like music or movies always seem to be on like a lower tier and like just not hitting the mark. And so I would be interested to hear your guys' opinion on it, because I have like my reasons why I think, but like why do you think that is, that like a Christian film production doesn't hit the same levels as like a mainstream one, or like a Christian music artist doesn't hit the same levels?
I have a few theories. So my thing is that they try to be too ham-fisted a lot of the times. They try to force it down your throat, and that throws a lot of people off. And when that's your entire goal, everything else from the production is going to take a backseat to that. There's a few examples specifically in the music world that I can say bands that are very Christian and they have a very Christian message, but it's not overt, and so they have mainstream success. POD is one that's very, very successful in the early 2000s, but they had a very Christian message. Switchfoot's another great example that had pretty good mainstream success. Same thing with Reliant K, the lead singer from Reliant K. He dated Katy Perry at one point. So there's a lot of overlap within there. I grew up Catholic, but I'm not any sort of Christian or Catholic anymore. But I can still enjoy that music because it has a message, but it's not shoving it down my throat where it detracts and distracts from the rest of it.
Yeah.
So I would say that's a primary reason with movies. So like something like Bible Man will never compare to Power Rangers because, as the name implies, it's has one main goal and purpose.
Okay, so my theory is just the industry in general. When you think of Hollywood, when they're making a movie and they're funding a movie, generally you want to fund the projects that reach the widest audience. And so that's who gets the funding. Mm-hmm. Whereas these Christian productions, I mean, they're a niche. They're a much smaller audience. They're only going to appeal to that crowd most of the time, especially if they're setting out specifically with that message in mind, like the Buttercream Gang, is very overtly Christian. They're in church and you see their pastor is part of their community and all that stuff.
Yeah, pastor coach is how I wrote it.
Yeah, he's the pastor, he's the coach. He
literally says, what could be more important than baseball when they write off to help someone? I'm like, well, you are a pastor, so I can think of a few things.
So I think it's just like, I don't think Hollywood wants to really throw a lot of money at these projects, so they're sort of forced to fund them themselves, and so automatically they'll have less resources. But it could also be a choice that maybe they choose to fund their own projects as a way to have complete control over them, that maybe they fear if they try to pitch it to a larger studio or bigger investors that they will request changes that they're not comfortable with.
I see parts of what you're saying, and I think some of that ties into what I said, where, the overt goal is, to put that in the forefront of, putting this religious message in the forefront. And the more successful ones that have had mainstream success don't have that. Here's an example within the world of television. It's Seventh Heaven was a very Christian show. It really is. I mean, I guess the name implies that, really.
Mhm.
But that had mainstream success outside of that, just within the family sitcom kind of like drama world, So it took a backseat. It was not, here's your Bible quote opening the show.
Yeah.
Right. So that's where it is. And they don't want to alienate an audience, and they want to potentially get more people involved with it. So you put it in the back burner. I remember the first time I listened to Reliant K, I was like, oh, these guys are religious?
Yeah, I was just like, oh, is that a banjo? Sick.
Yeah. Well, and I guess that was always my frustration growing up, was that it always seemed like, Christian music, I'll just use that as an example, was never the originators. They were always like a knockoff per se of something else.
Are you telling me they didn't create the concept of a guitar rhythm game with guitar praise? You tell me that's a ripoff of something, John?
So you have Buttercream Gang is like a terrible movie, but then you have a similar movie in Stand By Me, which is like considered a classic. Or you have like The Goonies, when is more like the second Buttercream Gang. And, I think of Reliant K was heavily influenced by Blink-182. I always got to bring Blink-182 into the conversation somehow.
That's how I am.
But, it's always just like, where is like the originality? And it's like, okay, I'm not going to listen to Eminem. I'm going to listen to this white Christian rapper who's portraying an Eminem like vocalist instead of just being themselves and being original. Always just felt like a cheap version of it. And I do like Reliant K, though. I think they were able to kind of
Reliant K is one of the ones that does go out of there. There's a lot of people I know that listen that don't realize that it's religious.
Because there was a lot of Christian pop punk bands in the early 2000s and stuff, and most of them are completely disappeared and gone. And so yeah, and I mean, I always think of the South Park episode where Cartman starts a Christian band. I don't know if you've seen that one.
Yeah, I've seen it.
So where they just take all the love songs and change the lyrics to Christian lyrics or whatever.
All right, guys, this is going to be so easy. All we have to do to make Christian songs is take regular old songs and add Jesus stuff to them. See? All we have to do is cross out words like baby and darling and replace them with Jesus.
And it's just like, it's true. Like, you just change the lyrics and you steal or, inspired by. You borrow. And then you have like a captive audience that'll buy it. And I think the standards of Christians for like art and music and film are pretty low.
Need you in my life, Jesus. I can't live without you, Jesus. And I just want to feel you deep inside me, Jesus. Awesome.
The reason why that works, and I feel like it's continuing to happen, is because it works. And what it is they know that there's families that don't want these kids to be exposed to pop punk or this movie,
just
or
pop culture in general,
because of one reason or another. So you have this sanitized version of it that has elements of it that can still hook the kid just enough that it's an acceptable stopgap.
Because I can imagine as a Christian parent, obviously, if your kids are, especially if they're going to like a public school or something like that, all of your kids' friends are going to be partaking in pop culture and listening to the popular music and watching the movies and all of that. And if you personally feel that pop culture doesn't align with your values, and your kid is going to be craving that kind of content,
right.
Like they just want to fit in with their peers. And so you want to give them the next best thing.
The closest thing possible.
And so that's why a lot of these companies go out of their way to make them like knockoffs, essentially, that they're not original content. They're just like, things that already exist, but with a Christian spin on them, or like they're watered down.
It reminds me of that meme, Mom, can we get the Blink-182 CD? We have Blink-182 at home. It's a fucking Reliant K CD.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think for me, it just had like the opposite effect. You know, it just pushing more towards listening to Blink-182 or more towards listening to rap.
I
on
can
Cube
imagine
93
being
or-
in your shoes, being at a friend's house who has to listen to the neutered versions, right? And then hearing this, like, what other bands sound like Reliant K? Just listening to Blink-182 and Green Day afterwards.
Yeah, and just part of my personality is I'm like a purist when it comes to things.
Oh, yeah.
And so like I remember when I found out that Walmart CDs were like the edited versions, and I was just like, oh no, like I can't believe I've been listening to some like just random version of the song, you know. And
I remember when I learned that, and this is a very embarrassing CD to learn it from, but it was Limp Bizkit's second CD. And
I don't even know what it's called.
I don't remember what it's called either, but like it's the one that everyone knows, you know.
Hey Google, what was Limp Bizkit's second CD?
Limp Bizkit has released 19 albums.
Significant Other. That's the one. Significant Other. That one was censored. And I was like,
19 albums?
Yeah.
Wow.
They never stopped. That CD I got home and I realized it was censored. And I never bought another CD at Walmart again.
Just go download it off Napster.
Yeah.
LimeWire. So I mean, this leads to, I mean, if we want to talk about the 90s, like the whole like Christian community in the 90s, there was like the satanic panic, you know, and you guys touched on it in the
Law
Satanic
Enforcement
Cults.
Guide to Satanic Cults
yeah,
episode.
in that episode. But it's just funny to me how things have changed since the 90s. So, you know, a story from my childhood is the Harry Potter books. You know, they came out. I read the first 3, and my church literally had like an evening service where the pastor read like excerpts from the book. It was like, if your kids are reading this, you know, this is sinful, this is bad. And there's like, you know, the whole church is gathered there. And I remember my mom like looking down at me, he's like, are you reading these books? I was like, no, not at all. Like, I haven't read them, no.
Harry Potter, what's that?
So, you know, Harry Potter was like the huge like thing that parents and churches raised against.
Yeah.
And then now it's like my wife's parents' like favorite movie series, and they watch them and love them. And it's just like, what changed if they were like so bad and satanic and demonic and whatever to like fast forward to the 2010s and it's like, oh, it's fine, we were overreacting.
I think it's so funny because like even Pokemon was a big one because it pushed evolution. And then like when Pokemon Go came out, I was hanging out with you and a bunch of people from your church, like all running around together catching Pokemon together.
So this is funny. Did you know that there's actually a fan fiction out there called Harry Potter and the School of Prayer and Miracles? It's actually pretty recent. It's like some woman wrote a fan fiction about, it's basically just like a retelling of Harry Potter, but about them being at like a Christian
That's
school.
exactly what I'm talking
Their
about.
powers come from God and holiness, and it's really funny.
At least they call it Harry Potter and it's not, you know.
If you want to hear like a really funny, one of my favorite live streamers, Jabroni Mike, he actually did a series where he did a dramatic reading of the fan fiction, and it's really good. So go check that out on YouTube.
Why well, I kind of touched on it in that like it was always just kind of
because
it's always just knockoffs. And I think looking through kind of like church history, you know, you had the church responsible for a lot of art and a lot of creativity and a lot of like the Sistine Chapel, and you know, they commissioned that and had it paid for by the church because they used to value making art that would like last and was meaningful. And it feels like these days, and like all growing up, that the standards for excellence and quality in music and film and art for the Christian community was particularly low. There are some standouts, you know, but overall, like I can count on like one hand great like Christian films or like movies directed by like a Christian that are like great or have like strong religious overtones. And really the only one that actually like comes off the top of my head is Passion of the Christ, which is like it, on its own, regardless of the story or anything, is just like it's a great movie, and it's like it was a really well received movie.
Dude,
Not
even
just-
the Prince of Egypt.
The Prince of Egypt is another one.
I was thinking about the Book of Eli.
Book of Eli,
The
that's
Book of
another
Eli.
good one.
Denzel.
Yeah.
So it's like it's just so few and far
Dogma?
between. Kevin Smith, I mean, he was raised Catholic, you know, like, but I love his movies.
I don't think that one really counts, though.
Yeah.
So surely you're familiar with Left Behind.
Yeah, Left Behind. I read the first book back in the day, and I haven't watched any of the movies.
I have Left Behind 1 and 2 on VHS, and I also have a sealed copy of the making of Left Behind 1 and 2
Yeah.
on VHS. You know, there's a third one. I didn't know that, but there is, and I don't have it.
Yeah,
So
there's
I'm looking for it.
there's a lot of problems with those movies
Yeah.
and those books that
Yeah.
I don't need to go into. This isn't a theology podcast,
Yeah.
but yeah, it's just, you know, as someone who values, you know, great creativity and great art and music and things, seeing Christian artists not innovate and come up with
That's not just
original
knocking off.
things, and instead trying to just kind of be like whatever secular artist is topping the charts, you know, like it's just pointing, you know. So I've always kind of had the heart make a movie about like some Bible story or something and like actually have it be like really good, but it is like a very difficult thing to do because the Bible is not really like totally family friendly, and like there's a lot of stories you can't just like make a movie about, and I wish we could be better, but
Christians deserve better. You deserve better, Christians.
right.
Come on.
Would your movie have biblically accurate angels?
Dude, do you
Yeah.
remember? I think it was like the late 90s, early 2000s. There was like this big like angels fad that every like society went through. We had like angels in the outfield, city of angels,
Yeah.
fucking
There's
like-
always like something. So I grew up going to Blockbuster, and I also worked at Blockbuster for a little while. But there's always like that thing where there's like the Angels fad, and then there was like volcano movies, and then there's like asteroid movies. You
Yeah.
have like Armageddon and Impact,
Deep
Sudden
Impact, yeah.
Deep Impact. What's Sudden Impact? That's something else.
I don't know.
Sudden Impact. And
Probably
so
another one.
there's
That's
always,
probably
like-
another one.
there's always like 2 or 3 movies that would release like the same year that had like the same like theme to them, you know. There was Volcano was literally the name of it, and then Pierce Brosnan was in Dante's Peak, and they both came out like right at the same time, and
volcanoes are so hot right now. So maybe we'll see Christian films innovate again soon. Like their time is coming, you know.
I don't know. It's unlikely because there are like Christian movies being made. I haven't brought myself to watch them at all. Like I think Fireproof was like a really popular one.
I haven't
about,
heard of this movie.
Mm-mm.
like firefighter or whatever. But yeah, who knows?
Bruce Almighty.
Bruce Almighty.
That was a great movie.
I love Bruce Almighty.
I don't think that counts, though.
Sure it does. Sure it does.
I think
He
that
gets
counts.
the power from God.
I think that
Not
counts as
during
much as.
Sweeps Week. Tom Cruise needs to reboot Buttercream Gang.
Tom Cruise needs bigger boots. Like Buttercream Gang, though. I don't know. So the first movie, skip it, watch it. What do you think, John?
I mean, there's no reason to ever actually watch it. But if you are curious, I would definitely watch the first one and skip the second one if you had to choose. And I think the first one, it works on some levels just because it is actually trying to tell some kind of story. And there is like conflict and there's relationships and people grow and change and all of that. As corny as literally every line of dialogue is, it at least was like trying. I don't think it like nails it, but it was at least trying. Whereas the second one is just completely silly and goofy, and
the climax of that first one made it worth it.
Yeah.
Pete's breakdown was great to watch.
Yeah.
I agree with everything John said. It's, watch. It's harmless. Watch it.
If you find it at the thrift store, yeah, just pick it up.
Grab it, whatever.
Pick it up, pour some shots. Yeah.
No.
It's not great, but it doesn't. I don't think it harms anyone being in the world. There's nothing infuriating about it.
You're saying the world is neither better nor worse for Buttercream Gang.
Yeah, that it's just kind of a thing, Like sometimes we watch stuff that makes me so mad that's like it's bad in a way that like infuriates me, that I'm like, I wish this did not exist.
What did we watch that made you so mad?
Oh my god, what did we watch? Halloween 2? No, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. But then there's some things that you're like, okay, this is amazing. This needs to exist. People need to see this. Yeah. And then you have this kind of gray area where it's like, well, that was a thing. And I feel Buttercream Gang falls into that category, that it's a thing. It's got some pretty nice shots that I think that if you grew up in a small town, maybe you would get a sense of like nostalgia or warm fuzzies watching it and just seeing the kids running around playing and the simple small town life. That, that's fine. But I mean, it's not, don't go out of your way to see it by any means. The second one, I'm just, throw it in the trash, light it on fire. It's awful. It's so fucking boring. It should not exist. It's bad. No redeeming qualities about it whatsoever.
I was too drunk last night to remember it. I remember Conquistadors, and
it was literally the first scene.
I remember Conquistadors. I remember the fat kid climbing up a cliff and them yelling at him to get down.
I think that's where we tapped out.
I remember him finding a stick, and then the pastor coach being like, "Don't take it off. It might disintegrate because it's old." Was it pastor coach?
Oh no, they found like the scroll. That's how they knew where the treasure was.
They had an archaeologist that they added, right? They were just hanging out with some archaeologists at the beach.
It was dumb. It's really fucking dumb. Don't watch it. Once again, we would like to thank our guest, John, for being on the show and being our first guest.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
And be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. We're also on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Give us a 5-star review. We'll read your review on the show. Check out our website, VHSaturday.com. We now have a mailing list if you would like to sign up for updates straight to your inbox.
Don't forget, we also still have stickers available that we are selling through DMs, so shoot us a DM on any of our social media to get a hold of one.
Thanks so much for listening, and we will see you next week.
Until then,
be kind, rewind.